Hello and welcome. My name is Danielle Forrest and I'm an alien romance author. And today we're going to be reading episode 17 of my alien romance serial, Fated Mates of the Drakoan. So let's get started. The moment Jess took his hand, he was ensnared. He could think of nothing else. Her warmth, the gentle lines of her fingers against his scales, the way her hand felt so petite inside his own. He was dimly aware of his surroundings. First, the change in footing, soft and steady to hard and uneven. It tried to draw his attention away to his balance, but he resisted. Then there was a sound, one he'd heard before, but couldn't remember where. They moved into the shadows, and he finally looked up. They'd stepped inside the back door of her home. It was a room he'd glimpsed before, for only a moment in darkness. Now, in the light of day, with morning light streaming through the many windows and glass doors, he could see it clearly. It was a food prep area. But Jess didn't stop there. Still gripping his hand, she pulled Davin forward, and he followed meekly behind, taking in this little bit of suburbia that reminded him of home. The furnishings and architecture were obviously different, but he could see the echoes of his own world and their common purposes. They passed through a common eating area, then a foyer for receiving guests, before entering a lounging area where the people he'd seen earlier were eagerly watching the window and muttering amongst themselves. It was a scene unlike anything he'd ever experienced. Everything was a bit smaller in scale than what he was used to. Central dining and lounging areas on Koa would have had enough space to fit a few dozen people, generally speaking. Here, they would be lucky to fit even a single dozen in the small space. As is, there were a total of 7, and it was already crowded. Jess, someone said, "What the hell is going on? What's he doing here? Why would you bring him in here?" Chaotically, several voices chimed in all at once, making it impossible for him to differentiate them. His gaze darted from face to face before finally shifting to Jess at his side, hoping she would take the lead. She knew these people, after all, and probably knew the best way to handle them. He didn't. "Guys, stop. Jeez, I'm only one person." A man stepped forward, fortunately not the one that had tainted his mate's scent. "What's he doing here, Jess?" He crossed his arms, clearly attempting to look tough, but it fell flat. He was the tallest of the group, other than Davin, but he could tell just by looking at him that he wasn't a fighter. The other man looked more like a fighter, but the way he was biting his nails made that possibility highly unlikely. "Oh, come on, guys, use your brains. I couldn't leave him out there where anyone could see him, not right now." "Why the hell not?" someone said. Though because he was paying attention to the tall man, he didn't notice who spoke. "Are you serious? You guys freaked out when you saw him. How do you think someone else would react? I couldn't leave him out there alone." "He shouldn't be in here either. It's not like he's one of the enemy. He's a Drakoan, an ally." "Then what was he doing outside?" Jess squirmed, glancing away as if she didn't want to answer the question. "Is she not proud to be my mate?" There was a moment of pain at the thought, but then Jess sucked in a breath, squared her shoulders, and spoke. "It's complicated. I don't know how to explain it exactly without getting too personal, but it's a biological thing." "She's my mate," Davin said, trying to help. You're what?" the offensive-smelling male said, his voice squeaking through several octaves before ending his question. Jess sighed. "His mate," she said, as if she was loath to admit it. Am I imagining that? Is that what she really feels? The pain returned, more intense this time, and he reached up, touching the spot over his heart where it hurt the worst. One of the women scoffed, her own arms crossing in front of her, her stance far more convincing than the tall man. What the hell does that mean? And why was he creeping outside my window? Another woman said almost inaudibly, her form partially hidden by the woman who'd spoken. Davin immediately felt guilty. This was what Jess had been talking about. He'd disrupted these people's lives, scared them, made me even hurt them in some small way. None of them deserved that. I'm sorry. The room grew quiet for a moment. This weakness is my problem, and I let it affect you all. I would say I didn't realize anyone else would be impacted, but that doesn't change the fact that you were. I don't know what I'm going to do better, as Jess would say, but I know that I need to. Why did you do it? The only woman who hadn't talked yet asked, stepping forward away from the others. He focused on her. I don't know what all you know about Drakoans, but a part of our biology is the ability to identify a mate by scent. This is very instinctual and driven heavily by biology. It can make rational decision making all but impossible. What does it make you do? She said, encouraging him as she took another step forward. It compels you to be with your mate. Being distant from them is difficult and can even be painful. Jess gripped his hand, reminding him that they were still touching. How did I forget? Is it always like that? I mean, I wouldn't be. Wouldn't that be disruptive if you could never be away from her? I've never really thought about it. This is all new to me. He's doing the best he can, Jess chimed in, bumping him in with her shoulder. Davin looked down, and she was smiling up at him. He smiled back and felt a weight lift off him, making the situation just a little bit more bearable. There's a lot I need to figure out. I'm sorry for dragging you all into my mess, though. It's fine. I think we can understand. She looked back at the other two women. One was still hiding and trembling slightly. The other looked a little defensive, probably being protective of her friend, which he respected. So you didn't have a choice in this? Neither of you did? He shook his head. That sucks. Jess scoffed. And it's really fucking inconvenient timing. Davin frowned. Jess's statement made him think about his team again. What were they doing right now? Were they worried about him? He assumed Van was pissed. But what about the others? I'm letting them down. Van could hold his own, keep the team running, but every time he had to come looking for Davin, their efforts here on Earth were probably ground to a halt. The team couldn't exactly go out to complete their next objective when one of their team members was missing. Now could they? So what do I do? That was the question, wasn't it? He needed to do something. But what could he do? When he was around Jess, he was distracted. When he was with her, he couldn't think straight. It was a damned if you do, damned if you don't sort of situation. Maybe I should stand down. The thought soured his gut, but it might just be his only choice. Van could handle things. He had no doubt of that. It just felt like a failure, and that wasn't something he was used to. He was used to setting his mind on an objective and seeing it through to the end. It felt wrong to give up, like he was too stupid to find a solution. He turned to Jess. He knew she wasn't the answer. She'd already said she didn't know what they should do, but he couldn't help feeling like any solution would involve her. It seemed logical that it would. Maybe they could find that solution together. They could brainstorm, after all. That might help. He was pretty useless right now, but the mating seemed to affect her a bit less than him, which was probably a good thing. One of them needed to have their head on straight through this. Or maybe one of her friends would have an idea. He lifted his head, scanning the small crowd in the even smaller room. There was the man who still had his arms crossed in front of him. He was wearing a shirt Davin had seen often in legal dramas back on Goa. Maybe he could be relied on to be the voice of logic and reason. The other man was wearing a shirt he recognized as being from the franchise Star Trek. Wasn't his cup of tea, but he could respect the fellow nerd. which was probably the only thing he respected about him so far. Then there was the darker skinned woman currently serving as shield for the skittish one. She would make a good soldier. Maybe she would have some valuable insights into strategy. Lastly, there was the female who stood in the middle of the room. She looked so small and soft, it was hard to believe that she'd been the one to serve as peacekeeper. But she'd already proven herself to him, and he could easily see her as the center of any effort that might unfold. Could this group possibly have the answers he sought? He cleared his throat. Maybe we should all sit. He gestured at the seats. There wasn't enough room for all of them, but Jess didn't seem to mind. She ushered Davin into a chair and sat on his lap. He was momentarily derailed by her curves and warmth assaulting his senses, but then he shook his head. Focus. Remember the mission. He took a deep breath, then watched as the last of her friends sat on the other chair and couch. He found himself starting to idly trace a line on Jess's arm as he waited for the others to settle in. When the last person was seated, now looking expectantly at him, he cleared his throat and spoke. My team and I, along with other teams all around the globe, are here to support the efforts of Earth's military forces in the aftermath of the conflict. As I've already told Jess, actions by Earth leadership took out the enemy fleet in space, but it seems to have had a negative consequences, including decimating the satellite communication network and knocking out power, potentially globally. A couple people gasped, and he paused while they composed themselves. We're here in Washington specifically to re-establish communication with leadership. Then we're to move on to New York. We landed about a day ago and have yet to locate anyone, which is to be expected. We're assuming U.S. leadership went to a secure location at the beginning of the conflict, and due to the communications blackout, do not know the conflict is over. Davin looked down at Jess. I'll admit, finding my mate has complicated things. I'm not sure what the best course of action might be. I want to keep Jess safe, which would mean leaving her here out of harm's way, but that proved to be unfeasible last night, as you all are aware. He focused on the skittish one. I am truly sorry for scaring you, by the way. That was not my intention. I believe your room is below Jess's? Realization popped on her face and she groaned. Oh, God, you're right. She laughed. Well, that puts things into a new perspective. She shook her head, then seemed to relax for the first time since they met. Her hand even dropped from the fragile necklace around her throat. Anyway, I'm at a loss at how to proceed. If I invite Jess to come with me, she will be in danger, should there be any of the enemy forces still out there. I am assuming they were all taken out by your leadership's bombs, but I would be foolish to operate under that assumption, especially with something so precious on the line. He leaned down and nuzzled the top of her head, the soft strands of her hair silky against his cheek scales. With a sigh, he straightened and continued. What's more, even if all the enemy have been defeated, there are still threats out there. Threats I might not be able to defend her against in the heat of the conflict. I don't know what to do. Well, it's not like there's a third option now, is there? The Trekkie said, rolling his eyes. Davin really focused in on him for the first time. The Trekkie scent irritated his nostrils, and the fact that he could smell Jess on the man was an incessant irritant at the back of his mind. But seemingly without any impetus, he imagined him with Van. It was at once the stupidest pairing he'd ever heard of and the perfect one. Van was a very serious person, but also loyal, kind, and brutally honest. If his movements were tense, like he was trying to do an impression of a robot, and he was often pedantic, refusing to go off script no matter what happened. This made him stubborn as hell at times. This Trekkie, on the other hand, was far more relaxed. He wore a t-shirt with a small hole in the front and joggers with a stain in the knee. So far, he'd had his smile on his face most of the time, and he seemed to laugh even when he was upset. His movements were more fluid, having an almost feminine grace to them, though he could never describe the men as feminine in general. They were such extreme opposites. He couldn't honestly understand why he'd pictured the two together. It was probably just jealousy talking. He probably just didn't like the fact that the man was close with his mate, and he was projecting him onto Van as some sort of coping mechanism. Then a bell rang. The Trekkie bounced to his feet, saying, "I got it!" then rushed out of the room. Everything stopped for a moment as everyone focused in on the door to the foyer. Many had shifted to the edges of their seats, and Davin had even reached his hand down to his holster just in case. His mate was here, as were her friends, and he would defend them if he had to. Should have gone to the door myself. Except it wasn't his home. He didn't have the right to answer the door for them, and they hadn't exactly asked. He would happily be their shield if need be, but again, they hadn't asked. Jess had quite eloquently explained their situation to him in the yard. He knew the fear they lived with daily. He could imagine that answering the door right now would be a pleasant experience. The anticipation of what threats might loom outside filling the mind. Davin listened as the door clicked open and closed. No words were exchanged. Then two sets of footsteps walked back toward the lounging area. Davin tensed, ready for whatever came next. The Trekkie stepped through, an odd expression on his face, and a moment later Vannon followed suit. Damn. Time to face the music. Anyway, that's the end of episode 17. Let me know in the comments what you thought and what you think is going to happen next. How is Van going to react to Davin fucking up again? And what is Davin going to say in order to try to rectify the situation? And what are they going to do? Like the damned if you do, damned if you don't situation. What are they going to do about that? Let me know your theories. Anyway, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. If you like the video, consider giving it a like and subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell if you want notifications. And if you want to connect with me and my content in other places, you can find links down below in the description of the video, as always. And if you are really into this story and you want to read ahead, you can do so on as a member of my Interstellar crew on Ream. Well, it will be available. Argo, it will be available on replay, so you can rewatch it at the beginning if you'd like. Feel free. And I just forgot what I was saying, which is fine. Yeah, you can also read ahead as a member of my Interstellar crew on Ream. If that is something you want, it's currently 5 episodes ahead. And I'm going to once this is fully uploaded on YouTube for replay, I will put some cards on the screen, and you can to see some of my other videos and playlists. Anyway, that's all I have for now. I thank you, Argo, for joining, even if it was midway. Feel free to, I do have a full playlist of this series, so you can absolutely check that out as well. And I will see you next time. I'm going to be doing a 12:30 Eastern live stream tomorrow for a productivity